Il était une fois l'Afrique, la belle Afrique, la grande Afrique. Sa grandeur se manifeste à travers de nombreux royaumes et empires prospères, tels que l'Empire du Mali, le Royaume de Ghana, l'Empire de Burkina Faso, l'Empire carthaginois, le Grand Zimbabwe, pour en citer que quelques-uns. La prospérité de ces royaumes était principalement attribuée au commerce. Avec l'essor du commerce, les grandes villes ont bâti une autorité sur l'échange des marchandises. Tenez par exemple l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Les grandes villes aux centres commerciaux attractifs comme Timbuktu et Djenné se sont développées. Le long de la côte de l'Afrique du Nord, les villes portières comme Tunis, Marrakech et le Caire ont acquis une réputation dans le commerce avec l'euro. L'or, le sel, l'ivoire, les peaux d'animaux et les autres métaux précieux étaient les principaux articles échangés au nord, tandis que les produits manufacturés tels que la portière, les verres, les métalliques étaient échangés au sud. Aujourd'hui, alors que nous forgeons l'avenir du commerce bilatéral et multilatéral, nous devons nous rappeler que les anciens royaumes africains prospéraient de la même manière. Si nos ancêtres pouvaient commercer équitablement entre eux et avec l'Occident, pourquoi ne pourrons-nous pas le faire aujourd'hui? En sommes-nous incapables? Assurément pas. As Professor Achampong, the distinguished Ghanaian economist, noted, yet another sign of greatness and exceptional advances in pre-colonial Africa was the ability of its leaders to move markets, as illustrated by King Mansa Musa's stopover in Cairo on his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324. The Arab historian Shihab al-Umari, who visited Cairo 12 years after King Mansa Musa, wrote, and I quote, "Mansa Musa left no empire or holder of royal office without a gift or load of gold. He and his company gave out so much gold that they depressed its value. As early as the 13th century, an African leader could single-handedly influence the market value of gold. Today, despite the fact that Africa accounts for 50% of the world gold, its price is not determined by Africa. Africa needs to regain its past glory by trading within the continent and beyond. The Africa Continental Free Trade Area provides an opportunity for Africa in general, and Cameroon in particular, to re-engineer trade on the continent and guarantee prosperity for its citizens. This can only be possible if we fine-tune our bilateral and multilateral trading relations. Ladies and gentlemen, our discussion today will be focused on Cameroon's bilateral and multilateral trade. Where we are, where we want to be, or rather where we ought to be, and what needs to be done. We are honored to have here today the presence of distinguished personalities to provide us pertinent response to these questions that we as Cameroonians and Africans are asking ourselves. We know that neighbors play a vital role in our lives. When you cry out for help, the first person to come to your rescue will definitely be your neighbor. That is why the Bible tells us to love our neighbors as ourselves. So join me today to welcome our beloved neighbor on stage in the presence of Her Excellency Madame Lami Saomi Ramawa Ahmed, who is the Deputy High Commissioner for the Federal Republic of Nigeria to Cameroon. While waiting for the other panelists, permit me to say this. Nous savons nous tous que le Cameroun est un pays jumeau dans le monde par le partage en commun du bilinguisme. Ce pays jumeau, c'est le Canada. Les jumeaux ont généralement une liaison spéciale dans tout ce qu'ils font. Cela inclut le commerce. So please help me to welcome His Excellency Mr. Richard Bell, High Commissioner for Canada to Cameroon. Ladies and gentlemen, Your Excellencies, thank you for honoring this invitation. We all know that in Cameroon we are forging our way towards emergence by the year 2035. And when we look at our economy is basically agricultural based, and the future of Cameroon lies in SMEs. And what do SMEs do? They have to produce and sell. Whom do they sell to is where the question lies. Today I would like to ask the question to our neighbor. Nigeria is the closest to Cameroon. We have a very long border. We have about 9 official corridors. But trade between Cameroon and Nigeria is largely done in an informal manner across the borders from different points. What do you think is important for Cameroon and Nigeria to do in order to streamline their trade relations and so both economies can benefit from exchange of goods and services?
Yes, yes, Madam Free, as you just stated now, and also as was observed by the earlier presentations, with a border of about approximately 1,700 kilometers, which is the land border, and then we also need to take into cognizance maritime border as well. The opportunity and potential is enormous. It's not really quantifiable. However, to what extent have we really taken advantage of the opportunities of trade relations between both countries? And like I said, not only the two countries, but with both countries being giving access to 2 sub-regions, technically, which is the CEMAC region and the ECOWAS sub-region as well. To what extent have we enacted those policies, enacted and implemented those policies that would heighten trade relations and also formalize a lot of the processes which currently are in an informal state. I would like to state here that one of the key factors, or one of those measures that needs to be taken, is increased engagement. And when I say increased engagement, I mean at the public engagement, which is at the government level, policymakers, the government of Cameroon and the government of Nigeria, public-private engagement and partnerships, as well as private-private partnerships and engagements. There's a lot that can still be done within those spaces to increase the engagement, and not only increase the engagement, have a real sense of what is actually going on at the grassroots level, how we're able to translate that into policies at the government level for implementation, for ease of, to enhance and ease these trade processes. During my time here, we've done a lot of work into seeing to what extent do we have those engagements, especially between the two private sectors of the country. Like was earlier stated, a lot of the trade is done by the SME sectors in Cameroon, which form most of the basis of the Cameroonian economy. In Nigeria, we have a similar situation with the MSMEs. And recently, in the past couple of years, the federal government of Nigeria has instituted a lot of policies with the Central Bank of Nigeria and the relevant ministries to build these sectors, and enhance competitiveness, taking into consideration the contributions and the considerable amount of GDP that these sectors make up for the Nigerian economy. And we can see, I think we're seeing returns in that aspect. We're seeing returns in that angle. Now, the pandemic had an effect, a general effect globally. In Africa, we saw the effect that it had on us as well, with a lot of trade, international trade being affected, economies actually sliding into recession and others. And coming out of this, surprisingly, Nigeria last year, we had a projected growth of about 2.5, 2.7 in GDP. However, we surpassed the Nigerian economy actually surpassed that. And growth was about 3.4% of GDP. This year we have a projected growth of about 2.7 again. And however, for the CBN for what we have seen internally for our own projection is probably over 4% of GDP for this year. And this has been largely as a result of policies that have been implemented, especially social investment policies, which have created a lot of space and room for inclusivity of medium and small scale enterprises and entrepreneurs. And this in effect also has a ripple effect on trade within and also outside Nigeria. And Nigeria, with Cameroon as our principal cross-border trading partner, we expect to see a rise in that as well. So in essence, what I'm saying is those engagements, we need to enhance those engagements. We have platforms which actually can be some active, others not, which can be reactivated, which we're actually working towards seeing that. We have the Nigeria-Cameroon Joint Commission, which at a very high level of governance, engages on trade relations and other matters as well. And seeing a strong commitment towards sustaining that engagement at that level is very important. We also have a situation where for private sector PPP engagement, we would expect to see an appreciable level of engagement as well. To what extent are our chambers of commerce, for example, chambers of commerce in Nigeria, chambers of commerce in Cameroon, to what extent are we engaging? Do we have a viable platform, where the private sectors for both countries are engaging, are researching and taking data in real time? These are the real people, the real traders, the real business people who are on the ground, who are engaged. To what extent are they engaging each other to find solutions to challenges that are identified in terms of maybe trade barriers, tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, those issues that may exist that affect trade between these two countries. So to what extent are they engaging, and are they able to advise or make suggestions and recommendations to policymakers in order to address these challenges?
Your Excellency, we'll come back to that pertinent issue that you have raised. I'll turn on to you, His Excellency. We have the Deputy High Commissioner who has raised some pertinent recommendations that to advance trade between bilateral trade, there needs to be increased engagement, increased public-public engagement, increased public-private engagement, as well as private-private engagement. Would you say that is the case between Cameroon and Canada? Or is it different, or engagement is already at a level, at an appreciable level for us to see impact?
Good morning. That works great. I'm going to cheat by answering a different question, but if you insist, I'll come back to that one. Because I was listening with great interest to my comments, my colleague from the Nigerian High Commission. In the introduction, it was pointed out that there's a great similarity between Canada and Cameroon, and typically when people talk about that, they think about bilingualism. They think about the fact that both countries have common law and civil law systems, and that at international organizations we sit next to one another because of the alphabet, so Canada, Cameroon. And there's a fourth similarity, which is very relevant for today, and that is that both of us sit next to a very big neighbor. In the case of Canada, it's the United States. In the case of Cameroon, it's Nigeria. And in economic and commercial terms, that represents a tremendous opportunity, but also a challenge because of the size differential and things like that. So now, when I look at Cameroon and Nigeria, and I think of this kind of in the context of the Canada-U.S. relationship, when I think about the potential for trade, and not only trade in goods, but also trade in services, I'm kind of drawn towards the services end of the spectrum, which people often neglect, people often don't think about. And of course, in the classic economic growth model, you go from agriculture to industrialization, and then economies move on to a service economy. But you don't actually have to go through that industrialization phase. You can jump straight to services if you have a sophisticated population. And when I look at Cameroon, I see lots of young people, I see lots of educated young people, and I see lots of sophisticated, educated young people, many of whom speak both English and French, and therefore in terms of services exports potentially have access not only to both Francophone African countries and Anglophone African countries. Now, what's one of the examples where actually Cameroon is quite successful already, including in the Nigerian market, and that's music. There are lots of Cameroonian performers who have markets outside of Cameroon, both in Anglophone Africa, including Nigeria, and in Francophone Africa. And I'm constantly, well, not constantly, but I'm a bit older than the average, and so I'll come across the names of Cameroonian singers who I've never heard of before, and I ask, oh, are they famous? And of course they're really famous, it's just that I don't know it. And then I discover that they're famous not only in Cameroon, but also in Nigeria, also in Cote d'Ivoire, also in Senegal. So there's a market there already in that services sector. And it seems to me that's a market that has developed without much, or perhaps without any government support. And so that leads me to think that there's a potential for growth in that particular industry if there were, with additional thinking, with additional strategizing, with potentially additional funding to support that sector. What's another sector where, what's another services sector where there could be tremendous potential, both in the Nigerian market and others? Now, this is a sector which is at a much more embryonic stage, but there's already success, and that's the film sector. So, in the last couple of years, you've seen this kind of breaking out of Cameroonian films internationally, particularly through the Netflix platform. And then you look across to your giant neighbor, and Nigeria. I had the privilege of living and working in Nigeria a long time ago, back before Nollywood had actually developed, and I was stunned when I came back and saw the size of Nigeria's film industry, and that's an economic engine. And if you see the beginnings of this success in Cameroon and look at Nigeria's success, you think that also could be a service sector where Cameroon has potential, and where, of course, there's significant potential for cooperation with the Nigerian industry for selling product film into the Nigerian market, and that's another unexplored services sector, which I think has tremendous potential as an export. So not and in Nigeria, but also in other markets. When I look at Canada, US, another very significant services, I mean, effectively it's an export, is tourism. So whenever, I mean, there are many American tourists come to Canada, and that's effectively a services export. Cameroon has tremendous potential in the tourism sector, which is totally undeveloped. Cameroon has gorillas. How many people know how Cameroon has gorillas? Do you know how much people pay to go and look at gorillas in Rwanda? Yeah. But here, it's many people don't even know. And that's just one example. When you go to the West region, you see a fair number of tourists from France. Do you see any French-Canadian tourists? None. Are there any Nigerian tourists? Well, I'm sure there's one or two, but I've never met a Nigerian tourist in the West. So there's another sector that has a lot of potential in Cameroon. Specifically, you could attract tourists from your biggest neighbor, but that also is relatively undeveloped. The last sector which I'll flag, which is not necessarily services, but often it is, and that's in technology. And one of the things that has struck me in coming to Cameroon is that there is a small but quite dynamic technology startup sector. Now, sometimes technology startups are producing things like goods. So it's a manufacturing industry, but other times it's a service. It's software that you, for example, that you sell. It could be in the form of outsourcing. So and again, I look at Cameroon's young, educated, bilingual policy, and the bilingualism would give those technology startups access to both French-speaking and English-speaking markets. And you have some very strong technology schools here in Cameroon, whether it be at the University of Buea, where this whole phenomenon started, the startup phenomenon, whether it be Polytechnique here in Yaoundé, schools in Douala. And where is the most successful technology startup sector in Africa? It's over here, it's in Nigeria. Nigeria has a very dynamic technology sector which has attracted more foreign capital than anywhere else in the African continent. And Cameroon already has good connections into Nigeria, into the Nigerian startup sector because of the language commonality. Could that be developed further? Of course it could. So there's another growing sector, a sector with tremendous growth potential, where cooperation between Cameroon and its much larger neighbor could be very, very positive. And I guess I'd urge all of you to think about the services sector rather than those kind of like commodities, which is the traditional export, whether it be palm oil or bananas or whatever. But think about the services sector because it's in services where there's a very strong potential for growth, and it's in services where there will be tremendous employment opportunities for Cameroon's young, educated, talented, bilingual workforce. And at the end of the day, a lot of all this economic growth, trade expansion, is about employment creation. And think about all the possibilities with your massive Nigerian neighbor sitting next to you. Because again, when I look at the Canadian example, in all of those sectors, Canada benefits. Canada's principal commercial relationships are with our big neighbor next door. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We have the High Commissioner has made some pertinent recommendations of diversifying our economy, moving from the goods to service industry. But if we look today, we see that our economy, especially SMEs, are largely in the production of goods. Now, from what he has just said, it appears informally the service industry is really integrating with its neighbors, with Nigeria, in terms of music, in terms of technology. But for those who are already in the production sector, for example, in the agricultural sector, is there a possibility of integrating the value chains of some products?
Recording in progress.
So that we can actually see both SMEs in Cameroon and Nigeria working along a particular value chain, let's say the cassava value chain or so. This value chain is integrated for the benefit of the SMEs in both countries. Is that a possibility? Is that something we can look forward to?
Most definitely. All the issues that, what was the observations by the Canadian High Commissioner are definitely very important. They're salient, the services sector. And yes, we can see this happen. In fact, we're already seeing it happen where value chains are being expanded, they're being enhanced with the integration of technology, and ICTs. Technology is driving the fourth industrial revolution, so it's something that definitely going forward needs to be more and more incorporated into more conventional and traditional forms of trade. So when we see this, we see this happening now, like I said, we see this happening now in Nigeria. And yes, also driven primarily by the younger population who make up majority of the Nigerians actually. So having those exchanges again, like I said, those cross-border exchanges, that is why we need to start having those conversations, because we are close, we share a lot of affinity. We share the border, we share cultures, we share languages, we share a lot of affinity. But at the same time, there's still a bit of distance. There's still a bit of distance. And where people, we could speak to a number of people in certain areas in Nigeria. Have you been to Cameroon? And they would probably say, no, I haven't. So, and there's a lot of issues. There's also connectivity. Even transportation, if you look at transportation, sometimes you have challenges actually getting from one place to the other. Air flights may not be available. Recently, a lot has happened in that space. I remember coming here when I was arriving. I took a flight from Abuja, and which ordinarily should be, from Abuja to Yaoundé should be an hour or an hour 15 minutes ordinarily. But coming here, I spent 9 to 10 hours to get here. Because at the time, we didn't even have a direct flight between connecting Yaoundé and Abuja. So there are just a lot of issues, and these challenges are opportunities. They are actually opportunities. But now we're increasingly seeing a lot of companies that are going in and filling those spaces, filling those gaps and providing those services, as was mentioned by the High Commissioner. So yes, there is a lot that can be done and is being done. Fortunately, we're looking towards that area. But then again, we need to enhance and increase those engagements. Like what we're doing now, having this conversation, can be amplified, can be sustained, and at the various levels, vertically as well as horizontally. It's very important.
One of the most important things that Your Excellency has mentioned is infrastructure to foster trade and the growth of our economy. There's need for investment in infrastructure. Now, when we look at our government and the investments that is made from bilateral donors like your country, is there a need for all the funds to be channeled towards developing infrastructure? I remember, I come from a region in Cameroon where we believe a lot in community development. And there's one saying that I used to say in the villages that just give up the road and every other thing will take place. We'll have we can move our goods from the farm to the market, you don't need to invest in other things, just give us the roads. Is that something you would recommend at a higher level for us to channel our investments towards building the necessary infrastructure that will promote trade between Cameroon, Nigeria, within the sub-region and even at the continental level?
Yeah, I think that's very, very important. And certainly when I look at Canada, US as an example, so we have highly integrated supply chains in certain industries, for example, in the automotive sector. And before you end up having a car, that car can kind of go back and forth across the border many, many times, because it gets one thing done in a plant in the US, and then it's sent to Canada and has another thing done to it, it comes back again. Now that's an unusually highly integrated supply chain. But that can only happen if you have not only the physical infrastructure, so the road, whether it's roads, railways, in some cases aircraft, but also you have to have the efficient and effective trade facilitation at the border, so the goods go back and forth very quickly. And that's clearly it's a fundamental part of the architecture that is needed here in Cameroon, in Semak, across border with Nigeria. So that's the foundation upon which you can grow that international trade. I was in Chad last week, and I was told that the World Bank has just approved, this is a good example of this, it's just approved a big project to upgrade the road infrastructure between N'Djamena and Douala, which of course is critical for Chad because everything comes up on that road. But it also creates two-way export opportunities. The better that road is, the easier that road is, the more goods will flow back and forth. How good are the roads between Cameroon and Nigeria? Not so good. So now maybe if you take the southern part with northwest, southwest, okay, there's the security challenges there at the present time, but in the north, where it's my anecdotal sense that there is a lot of back and forth already in the north. And partly, there's the kind of historical and ethnic linkages. I gather when Nigeria was in the CAN, Nigeria was when they were playing in the CAN, lots of people found their way across to the stadium at Garo. I don't know if they walked or what, but not easy because there hasn't been the investment, to my knowledge. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there hasn't been the investment in that cross-border trade. It would happen anyway. When Nigeria was subsidizing the price of oil, it would get smuggled across the border to Cameroon, right, if I can speak frankly, across terrible roads. But yes, if you invest in that infrastructure, and it's got to be, so Chad is a good example where it's happening, but into Gabon and the ECAS region in that direction is very important. And across to Nigeria has to be critical. Whether it's roads, I don't imagine anybody's going to build a railway, but the air linkages, as the Deputy High Commissioner noted, are pretty limited. And that's going to be a constraint unless that gets sorted out. So the answer clearly is yes.
Yeah. We have a pertinent issue to discuss here, and that is the trade facilitation at the border. The High Commissioner has just mentioned that. And I think the Vanessa corridor, the African Development Bank had a project that it was financing to have a border market at Ekok, as well as one border crossing, as opposed to the current situation where traders have to cross from the Nigerian side. You meet the customs, the immigration officers, and just crossing a single bridge, you face the same thing in Cameroon. What exactly do we really need to do to facilitate trade at the border? Because this is one of the reasons why trade between Cameroon and Nigeria is largely informal. There's a lot of smuggling. As we all know, the border is porous. You cannot monitor close to 2,000 kilometers. In villages, people just cross in and out, carry goods on their backs from Nigeria to Cameroon and vice versa. But if we can facilitate border crossing, is there hope that we can streamline trade between Cameroon and Nigeria and make sure that not only the traders benefit, but also the governments benefit from this trade that happens between the two countries?
Well, most definitely, yes. That would be the very obvious answer. But how to go about doing that and getting to that stage? Now, yes, now a lot of people ask, I mean, I have people who come up to me and say, oh, I read somewhere, I heard somewhere that there are about 5 million Nigerians living in Cameroon, and they're always flabbergasted, and I say, yes, there are. I mean, we have a very long border, we share a very long border, and those communities exist. For the communities, for the border communities, the border is invisible, it's non-existent. It's existent to us, we who sit here, and policymakers and the rest. But for those who live in those communities, those borders are non-existent. So, in as much as there's a lot of going back and forth, like you've rightly pointed out, when it comes to the actual trade, movement of goods, movement of even services, logistics, for example, transportation and the rest, there are those challenges that are encountered by those at that level who are partaking in these activities. Now, this is where definitely policymakers come into place, but then we need to work in cohesion. We have the bilateral relationship between Cameroon and Nigeria, but then we also have at the multilateral level, the relationship with both countries actually being gateways to their own regions, economic regions. So the engagements need to take place at those levels to identify what those issues are, to eliminate those hindrances and ensure that there is that fluidity going back and forth between the two borders. We have a lot of members of the community who say, there doesn't seem to be a synergy, between at the border posts, between duplicity of many processes that could be eliminated very easily, especially with the introduction of technology and other means, and streamlining at the level of policy making and implementation. So definitely, there's a lot that can be done, and it will be done. Those engagements have already started taking place. So we hope that going forward we're able to sustain and then also see the changes towards that area in order for the benefits to be accrued.
Okay. Now, I want to ask a question, because all what we're saying, pushing forward trade and all that, is for the betterment of the citizens. Usually we say, oh, the country this year we achieved 4% growth, 3% growth. But when you talk to the man in the street, they just laugh at you and they say, what are you talking about? The price of oil, the price of cooking oil, the price of sugar, the price of basic necessities is going up. So what growth are you talking about? What exactly is a recommendation that we can make for such that the growth that we see at the macro level is felt at the micro level?
You say that tough question for me. You've touched on a whole debate, right, about the equal or unequal benefits of international trade, and much as it's complicated to ensure that international trade grows and grows smoothly, it's even more complicated to ensure that the benefits of that increased trade translates into equal growth for all. And there you start getting into much more domestic as opposed to international policy. So that's one whole discussion. Which I don't think I'll go over that because I'm not sure I'm qualified to. But what I will talk about purely in the international trade arena, because this is something that in Canada we have focused on a lot in the last few years, is trying to provide open and equal access to export markets to all kinds of different exporters. Now, in our case, I think that started with a focus on women exporters, and we said, hey, wait a minute, are we as a government, I'm talking Canada here, as the Canadian government, are we providing sufficient support to women as well as men, female as well as male exporters, in order to ensure that female-owned and managed businesses can benefit from international trade. And then a bit later we said, we also have indigenous peoples, and the whole indigenous peoples issue has become very big in Canada. So we started making special efforts to provide support to indigenous exporters. And then next, I think it was, this was like, then you had the whole Black Lives Matter movement in specifically the US, but it had its ripples in Canada. And then we asked, are we providing enough support to our different, what do you want to call them, immigrant communities, so to different ethnic groups. So now we're working very hard we're going out of our way to provide equal access and even special support to female entrepreneurs, indigenous entrepreneurs, ethnic entrepreneurs. And that is something that is within government's span of control. And so you can make a difference. Now already I see in Cameroon that there is a focus on female exporters. There's an example of a program called She Trades, which is being supported by, I think, both the Ministry of PMA and Ministry of Commerce. I don't know that Cameroon has gone or has yet gone into those other categories that Canada has focused on. In the area of trade policy, we've actually approached some other governments, not Cameroon yet anyway, to talk about these particular, what we call inclusive trade issues, in an effort to ensure that apart from we can choose to proactively support our female, indigenous, etc. exporters, but that also we want to kind of try to ensure that there are not systemic barriers in international trade to those groups that we wish to include. So that, in conclusion, that whole dimension of what we call inclusive trade, we believe is important, and we encourage others to pay attention to it.
I am sure that our audience would like to know when you will be contacting Cameroon for that policy. Let me just stay on with you. I think as a trader or a female trader in the trade, I would like to just ask that question on behalf of all the entrepreneurs out there. Cameroon trades with Canada, right? We import more than we export, but we would like to export to Canada. What does it take for us to export? I'm really talking about the small trader, not the big. What does it take for the small trader to be able to export goods and services to Canada?
That's a good question. I'll answer it to the best of my ability. Exporting is actually quite complicated. So let's say you're a small business in Cameroon that you've developed some kind of a food product that you wish to export. First of all, you have to have a good and a unique product. Okay, I'll give an example that I saw the other day, which was a good and a unique product. It was, so it was somebody had So it was a kind of a candy, and it was a cocoa bean inside a date, I think. No, I don't think Cameroon produces the dates, but anyway. So you had this mix of, like, the cocoa beans are kind of bitter, but the dates kind of sweet. So you had it kind of balanced, and I hadn't seen this before. Wow, this is a neat product. So first of all, you had a unique product, and of course you have to price it well. But then what's one of the really critical things where that you don't often see in a market like Cameroon is packaging. You have to have good packaging. So it's not just the product, but it's also the packaging. And then you want to ideally think up some kind of a name. So there's a kind of a branding element. So there's all these quite complicated dimensions which go into producing this final product, which isn't just the thing you eat. So that becomes quite complicated. So first you've got to do that work, and then you've got to do the actual market entry work, which can be time-consuming and can be expensive. You've got to figure out what are the regulations around the import into Canada of foodstuffs. Not necessarily easy to figure that out. How do you access the marketing channels? So ideally you want to find a distributor, and it has to be an effective distributor. And do you end up just selling into the kind of, let's say, the ethnic stores? There's a store in Montreal called Marché Mokolo. Okay, you can guess what kind of, Marché Mokolo is going to be selling African and probably principally Cameroonian products, so you can sell into that store, but that's just one store. If you want to grow your market, you want to access a much broader distribution channels. So export is a lot of work. It requires a significant investment on the part of the exporter. Now in Canada, there's a government-supported agency called the Trade Facilitation Office of Canada, which is there precisely to help exporters from developing countries. So it is possible to get a certain amount of information and support from an agency like that in Canada. But but the upside, in markets like Canada, not only Canada, but markets like Canada, people's tastes have become much more diverse and sophisticated, and so people look for new products. So if that manufacturer of that cocoa bean date product gets into the Canadian market, people will be interested. But it's the getting it there that is hard work, time consuming, and actually can be expensive. But good luck.
So, Excellency Lemika, I'm always very interested when I talk about Nigeria, because Nigeria was a special place for me in my heart, because I went to university in Nigeria. So during those periods, it was home. We could feel at home. We were made to understand that Cameroonians are not considered foreigners in Nigeria. But when it comes to the traders, the story is different. They face barriers, enormous barriers on both sides of the borders that makes it so difficult for that integration that we hope for to happen. What exactly needs to be done? We all know something needs to be done, but what exactly needs to be done for this non-tariff barriers, or if you permit me use the word, harassment of traders to stop, so that we can really streamline the trade relationship that we have between Cameroon and Nigeria?
Well, it still comes down to the engagements, honestly. Now, these are things that are experienced at the border posts, and I will still always emphasize the issue, the need for that engagement. Prime private sector engagement. And like I said earlier, vertically as well as horizontally, so that we're able to, because a lot of these people, especially the traders on the ground, to who are they able to talk to? Through what channels are they able to express the experiences that they do have at these border posts? So that engagement, creating those platforms for those discussions to take place, monitoring, for evaluation, and also to evaluate when policies are implemented, how do we evaluate or even quantify the impact? How do we assess if it has resulted in the desired impact, if it has made the necessary changes that are needed to enhance those trade relations. So we will still keep going back to that issue of having those conversations, government to government, private sector to private sector, and then government and private sector engaging in those platforms and having those engagements, which can really, really be amplified. They can really be amplified between the two countries. And I just wanted to add a little to what the High Commissioner had said earlier in terms of, also boosting the capacity at the SMEs and MSMEs levels, and also boosting export products from our countries to the outside world. There's also the issue of standardization and quality control. We find a lot of the time where there's an abundance of products which are not necessarily accepted at the international level, or for reasons of quality control and not meeting up with the required specifications in terms of quality and standards. So even investing in these areas, in the facilities, in the services, and the tools and equipment that needs to be put in place, in our respective countries, to look into, enhance the quality of our products to meet up with the competition globally, to be competitive in the markets, in the global markets. So that's also important. And His Excellency had also mentioned, looking at women and all, we really do need to adapt more gendered approaches in terms of services that are provided to encourage the growth of MSMEs, the growth and development of MSMEs. We also see where we can support certain sectors to, in their own way, support other sectors as well, and specifically looking at banking and finance, and banking and finance, offering loans, increasing financial literacy, financial inclusiveness, within those areas and those sectors. So there really is, there is a lot. There's a lot that's being done, but there's so much more that can be done. And looking at these areas and having those engagements would, help in facilitating all of those processes, and also addressing this issue of, the encumbrances that do exist, at the border crossings. And we're talking about land borders here, but also they exist in other ways here. There's maritime borders, moving goods from one, through freight and shipping, and then, as earlier spoken about, also, moving things through by cargo. So looking at all of these areas, it still needs a lot of that engagement where, because at the end of the day, the people on the ground do not make the policies and they do not implement them. They do not. But the experience, the effects of whatever policies are made and implemented. So those discussions need to take place at the policy making level and then also across the board.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are discussing on Cameroon's bilateral and multilateral trade, where we are today and where we need to be in order for Cameroon to be an emerging nation by the year 2035. I would like to turn back to Your Excellency. What policy recommendations can you make for Cameroon in order for us to become an emerging economy by 2035. It might sound like a long time, but it is just around the corner.
Okay, thank you. Well, of course, the government has undertaken this very extensive self-examination and strategizing exercise with the 2035 program, and I think that's a very important first step. And that's a Cameroon-focused initiative. i.e., it's focused on the Cameroon economy only. But of course, today we're talking about regional integration, and so I would say that there's a pressing need for Cameroon to press ahead with all of those regional integration efforts, which are, to an outside observer, look complicated because there are three levels. First of all, there's integration within the CEMAC region, and then there's integration within the ECAS region, and then ultimately there's integration within the entire African Free Trade region, and that requires a lot of policy resources, policy bandwidth, and political will. I'm not familiar enough with the different challenges that are there, but I'm sure there will be challenges to regional integration. For example, certain domestic players who may not want to see the market being opened up in order to protect their own interests as they perceive them, but that opening up is very important, and so that investment of political will becomes critical. We've touched on the infrastructure development needs, which I think are very, very important. We've touched on the trade facilitation needs, so that the importance of making the actual act of crossing a border, whether it be a person or a good or a service, although services cross borders much more easily. That act of crossing a border needs to be made simpler, more efficient. We've talked about the airlinks. This is certainly something in Africa generally. It's when I came back to Africa, when I came to Cameroon, I had spent many years in Asia, where there's this boom in budget airlines, and so regionally, especially in Southeast Asia, there has to have been a conscious effort on the part of governments to encourage the creation of these budget airlines that are flying internationally. And coming here, I was quite surprised to discover that that's not really the case here in Africa. And from my limited understanding of it, it's because, and this is a big challenge in regional integration, is because in that particular sector, each government, or part of each government, looks to its own kind of parochial interests. And for example, taxes on jet fuel. So each government might say, here comes an aircraft, it's an opportunity to generate some tax revenue. If that aircraft is going to fill up its tank with jet fuel here, we're going to put this big tax on. And that happens everywhere they go, and therefore the price of the ticket goes up, and therefore fewer people fly, and therefore airlines have a smaller market, and they put on fewer flights, and that's one of the things. I'm sure there's other things, but we just haven't seen this development of international budget airlines within Africa, and that's a critical element, just as much as roads are, to increasing international trade. So I guess in all of that, you need, at the level of government, you need everybody across government to recognize and to buy into that objective to increase regional integration and increase international trade. And I think that has existed for a long time in Cameroon within the CEMAC region, because Cameroon perceives itself correctly as being kind of the anchor of the CEMAC region. Everything comes in through Douala Port, and Cameroonian enterprises are active in Chad, in Central Africa, and Gabon. But there's kind of a mind frame transition that has to take place when you're moving into the much larger, whether it be ECAS or the African Free Trade Initiative.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency. Your Excellency had talked about the infrastructural needs to improve in invest in infrastructure, trade facilitation needs, but there's one other aspect that I think Nigeria is more advanced, is trade financing. What recommendations do you have for Cameroon in terms of trade financing? Because I think that is an important part for us to look into as we forge our way towards regional integration and conquering the African market.
In terms of trade financing, like I said earlier, in Nigeria, the banking and financial sector has been instrumental in this area, where this is where you see the private sector, bigger players in the private sector having an effect on the medium and small-scale enterprises by providing facilities, by providing loans, and also building capacity in order for this sector to grow and compete not only internally but also globally, regionally and globally as well. There would be to get to that level and even beyond would be to encourage to build the financial sector, banking and financial sector. Governments governments are primarily policy making, they handle the policy making aspect, and to create that environment where the private sector can thrive, where financial and banking institutions can thrive and grow and offer these services to the industries, to the companies at whatever scale, large scale industries, companies. So access to finance through the private sector enterprises would be definitely key, and this would be encouraging in implementing those policies that would help to grow the banking and finance, the internal banking and finance sector of Cameroon.
Thank you very much. I think at this point we would like to take a few questions from our audience. So if you have a few questions, we will be receiving questions both from our online audience also. So do we have any questions from our online audience?
Yes, for our online. Okay, for our online audience, Madam, we have some few comments. I'll just take that as I go. So we have someone, Kenneth Nsa, who says, I agree with you, Excellency. Cameroon has a great advantage from the linguistic perspective that opens us up to both Anglophone and Francophone African markets, but we still need a lot of work to harness and leverage this advantage. That's Sa Mala. And this one from Nicoline Mwenusi, she says, how good are the roads from the hinterlands to the seaport? Goods are produced in the hinterlands, and the road network in Cameroon is pathetic. Nicoline also adds, with e-commerce gaining prominence, the two countries will have to improve their electricity and internet connections to benefit from free trade. Thank you for mainstreaming women and indigenous people, Mr. Bill. We know farm to market growth, financial assistance to such categories. They cannot benefit from free trade. Women still have difficulties accessing loans from commercial banks, for example. There's another, I have Adamu Abubakar with a question. Comment peut-on parler de libre-échange avec nos voisins comme le Nigeria alors que les barrières douanières persistent à l'intérieur du Cameroun? Tenez par exemple, il est impossible de transporter des marchandises de Garoua en Gambéré sans faire face à des multiples barrières douanières physiques. I think Cameroon has to promote firstly its internal free trade before any other kind of opening commercial relations with other countries. Thank you.
Thank you to our online audience. Your comments were very pertinent, and we continue to encourage you to participate and leave comments or questions as we go ahead. So we'll take a few questions. Yes. Okay, yes, we have a gentleman here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity. My question is about the different agreements that we have. For instance, Cameroon belongs to CEMAC. Nigeria belongs to ECOWAS. Cameroon also is part of the OHADA agreement. What it means is that Cameroon has numerous agreements to function with. How do we reconcile all these agreements? When Cameroon is trading with Nigeria, Nigeria belongs to a different bloc, ECOWAS, and Cameroon belongs to CEMAC. Cameroon is respecting also the laws of OHADA, and they have also their internal laws, and Nigeria has their internal laws. How do these laws not at some point overlap? How do we reconcile them? There was the issue of self-interest, which surely might be is coming from the idea of the state-centered policies that we have. Because what is a state? A state is an association of people who have come together to meet their common needs.
Could we be brief so that we can give the opportunity for others to ask the questions?
Okay. Maybe we just take the first one, which asks about how we reconcile the various agreements.
Okay. Any other question? Yes, there's a gentleman to my left. Yes.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question. And my first question is directed to Her Excellency Rimawa Ahmed. You eloquently spoken about women and access to finance, and His Excellency Richard Bale gave the example of she trades. But we find that in Cameroon, microfinance banks have access to the informal sector and informal economy and informal traders, but they cannot facilitate cross-border payments. So I would like some thoughts on that. Do we think microfinance banks should play a much more inclusive role in facilitating trade finance, and how can we go about this going forward? And my second question is for His Excellency Richard Bale. You said the service sector is an important lever for the economy, both in Cameroon and both in Canada. And there is the potential for Cameroon to leapfrog, yes. But the service industry in both Cameroon and Canada are highly regulated. So the financial service industry, for example, it would be much more challenging for a bank in Cameroon to offer services in Canada without having to go through huge regulatory hurdles. So whilst tourism is important, and whilst other services like education is important, how can we leverage trade in the much more advanced parts of the service sector, like software and financial services? Thank you.
One last question for this first set of questions. Any? Okay, if not, then maybe we answer this first set of questions. You want to go first?
Yeah, okay, I'm not African, so maybe the first question I'm not best placed to answer, but I'll give it I'll just make one comment. So yeah, you're absolutely right with Cameroon in CEMAC and ECAS and Nigeria being in ECOWAS. There, the African Free Trade Agreement becomes critical for Cameroon to access the markets of its larger neighbor, and likewise for Nigeria to access. So that continent-wide free trade agreement is an extremely important development, I think, for Cameroon. On OHADA, I'll just comment that, because I met recently with OHADA. My understanding of OHADA is it's a framework that ensures consistent laws across Francophone African countries. But they told me that they are, in fact, talking to the African Union about expanding into the Anglophone, so kind of building on the African Continental Free Trade Initiative. So I think it's a very good question. But again, that it comes back to the potential significance of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and the importance of all members, including Nigeria as being the largest single economy, to really follow through on those commitments. On the service, you're the microfinance expert, so I'm not touching that one. On the service sector's question, it's a very good one. So I guess I would say it's a question of picking those sectors in order to achieve kind of quick wins, picking those sectors which face less regulatory barriers. So in something like music or film or tourism, there's either none or relatively minimal barriers to entry into other markets. Something like banking, yes, it's going to be more complicated. But if I look at the Canadian market, there are, which is a relatively protected market in the banking sector. We have 5 big Canadian banks that dominate. But there are, it is possible for foreign banks to obtain a license. So let's say, I don't know, pick a private sector Cameroonian bank.
SGBC, EcoBank.
Yeah, and let's say okay, let's say 2 things. Let's say, because often the foreign banks, when they first come in, they may serve their own diaspora. So, for example, if an Indian bank goes in, the first market they're looking at is the Indian diaspora in Canada. African immigration to Canada is increasing all the time. So at a certain point, there's going to be a critical mass of Africa origin Canadians that could be targeted by an African bank as their first kind of logical, almost domestic market. So, and when that happens, yes, there's a regulatory framework, but no, it's not impossible for the foreign bank, for the African bank to enter, because we've seen that happen already. Good question. Thank you.
And yes, I would have to agree with Ambassador Vale in terms of reconciling what is needed to reconcile what we would say are the approaches or agreements or whatever that exist within the ECOWAS, the CEMAC region, the ECAS, being members of these different organizations, and then also taking into consideration as well maybe the Francophone and Anglophone dichotomy and all. The African Continental Free Trade Area has a critical role. In fact, it was long in the making, very long in the making, but really has come at a critical juncture. This is when it's probably needed the most in order for us to, as a continent, streamline all our engagements, bilaterally, multilaterally, regionally, from one region to the other. So yes, definitely that framework would serve as it's going to be a lot of painstaking work, but it would definitely serve as the platform for where more energized frameworks can be developed in order to ease whatever differences or encumbrances may occur or conflicts of interest that may occur from one regional group into the other in terms of agreements and all. And for the financing, I think we really need to, one of the comments that was made from one of the online videos is with regards to investments, I think in ICTs, to build, that infrastructure really needs to be built on, because it gives us I wouldn't say a shortcut, or, yeah, to a certain extent, yes, a shortcut in processes, and increasing literacy levels in terms of knowledge, e-knowledge, and then increasing access, or having these groups, these segments, women, people in the rural areas, and all having access to finances, to loans, to funds, everything that they would need to grow their businesses. Now, for the banking sector, a lot of what we've seen in Nigeria is a lot of tools that have been made available to people in the rural areas specifically. And they have worked very closely with the telecommunication sectors, to be able to spread, these tools across the board and get more people engaged through simple, just your phone. There's so much that can be done just by using your phone. But how are we able to get there? The present president of the African Development Bank, who was our formerly Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria, he actually came up with that framework and that policy where farmers in rural areas were connected. They were connected. At the time, there wasn't a lot of understanding as to, where would we go? We're giving them phones, and what would they need to do with those phones? They have more urgent needs. They need money. They need tools. They need financing. But we saw the effect that it had, and it brought the farmers into it. It had a ripple effect on the agri sector in Nigeria, where farmers were able to liaise with buyers, they were able to liaise with agro-logistics providers, and where they were able to enhance their capacities, also able to liaise with the banking and finance industries, access loans, and so many other services and tools that they needed. So looking into that for Cameroon would be very, very important in order to provide those avenues for women, as you have mentioned, and also for those in the, not necessarily in the cities, but in the rural areas as well.
Thank you. Just to answer the last question from King, I think the operative word is bank. In Cameroon, we don't have microfinance bank. We have microfinance institutions. And any such transactions, international transactions that any microfinance institution wants to do has to go through a bank. So that makes it difficult for microfinance institutions to do transactions across countries on their own, because this is something that it's based on the history of the microfinance sector in Cameroon, that such regulatory measures were put in place. So I hope that answers your question. Now we'll take the next set of questions. Do we have an online question?
Yes. Yes, we do. We have Dr. Babila Thomas online, whose hand is raised up. So we're going to give him the opportunity to ask his question.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have followed the discussions on the forum, and it's very interesting. My question is directed to the Canadian ambassador. He has said a lot of interesting things. The question to him is, what has he done so far in collaboration with the Cameroon government to promote trade between Cameroon and Canada? Thank you. Thank you.
Any other question from? we take a set of 3 questions. Okay. If not, yes, we have a hand here.
Okay, thank you. My first question will be directed to Your Excellency. After the economic recession in 2017, Nigeria undertook some reforms in the banking and public finance sectors, as well as the diversification of revenues, with a focus on investments in culture as well as infrastructure, which permitted it to have a great economic leap forward. So I would want to know, in your own opinion, what should Cameroon do to actually achieve something like that? And to His Excellency, you gave a number of contributions and challenges which Cameroon actually faces. And between Canada and Cameroon, I think we have a lot of agreements and a lot of biddings which Canada has come into with Cameroon. I'll take 2 simple examples. Cameroon and Canada are partners within ICASU, which was hosted by Cameroon in 2017. And from what came out from it, we actually developed a new way to review our infrastructures in such a way that was going to bring in quick development for Cameroon as well as for Canada. And also, I think Canada also want to be to construct the Marriott in Douala. So, in your own opinion, what is challenging these structures actually being constructed, or what are the policies or challenges that makes it in such a way that both governments can't initiate these projects? Because I think since 2017, after the international conference on Canada, China, and Africa, structurally nothing has been done on ground. Thank you.
Okay, I think we can take this one with the second question. Okay. Ladies first.
Yeah. The policy at the time was aimed specifically at diversifying the Nigerian economy, given that our economy had predominantly been dependent on the oil and gas sector, oil specifically. With the lull in oil prices, we saw dwindling revenues, which affected all other sectors, and so the steps were taken deliberately by the government at the time to ensure that other sectors were developed in a manner, or to put those policies in place that would ensure that other sectors were developed in a manner that they would contribute considerably to GDP, and reduce that reliance on that one product which had made us almost a model economy. Now what we see is the non-oil export sector contributing about between 25 to 30% of GDP for the Nigerian economy, and oil and gas still playing a critical role, but then the non-oil export sector actually playing a much bigger role year on year. It would incentives were introduced, which are areas that can be looked at into here in Cameroon as well. Incentives to encourage those sectors where there's comparative advantage. Encourage the growth and development of those sectors. We've spoken about provision of finances. We've spoken about development of investment in infrastructure as well. The agricultural base here is very strong, so agriculture still remains, that one sector, including services as well as earlier stated by His Excellency, which is an area that the potential, to maximize the benefits from that area are huge. So it would be to provide those incentives and those tools and resources and facilities that those sectors would need, to amplify, to scale, to scale in their businesses and their contribute to GDP appreciably. Yes.
Thank you. We'll take the last question. Do we have anybody online? Oh, yes, sorry. Yeah, that's a question for you, so regard it.
Okay, yeah, I had a couple of questions, I think. So I'll take the easy one first, easy in a sense. So what has the Canadian High Commission done to support Canada-Cameroon trade? First of all, there's kind of a informal division of labor on international trade where, let's say, take the example of Canada-Cameroon, the Canadian High Commission, our role is to support Canadian exporters to Cameroon, investors into Cameroon, partnerships here in Cameroon, and for Cameroonian exports to Canada, that's principally the responsibility of the Cameroon government, whether it be the High Commission or any export support agencies. So we are active in supporting Canadian exports here. Each year we go through an exercise where we identify priority sectors. So this year, for example, clean tech, ICT, education, and a certain focus on infrastructure and mining. But we don't play much of a role. And if we can be helpful at a kind of a, if there are easy things we can do to help, we would. But we don't really play a role in supporting the export of Cameroonian products to Canada. On the second question, which was really focused on infrastructure, right? Now, the first reference, that's before my time, and I'm not very familiar with that, the Canada, Africa, China discussions. But I can answer in general terms, and then you gave the specific case of the Marriott Hotel project, which is being in Douala, which is being led by a Canadian promoter. Infrastructure projects, by their nature, are long and complex, and particularly in markets where there's not a history of and a kind of established model for doing infrastructure projects, it becomes even more complicated. So, for example, in Canada actually is a leader in PPP projects as a particular model of doing infrastructure, and I'm told that one of the reasons that we do so many PPP projects is that there's been a kind of a model that has been developed that now everybody understands. So the bankers understand it, the lawyers understand it, the governments understand it, the companies understand it, and that there's this reference model that everybody goes to. So, and over time it's become easier. So it's just kind of almost like, it's not really a cookie cutter, but it's almost a cookie cutter approach. In markets like Cameroon, that's going to be much less the case. And so every infrastructure project is going to be kind of a one-off, which is with its own challenges. And of course, why are infrastructure projects so difficult? They're very expensive. They take a lot of time. They require the involvement of, even if there's a single company that leads, there's many sub-suppliers. And on the government side, there's typically many government departments that are involved. And so the kind of the internal coordination on the government side can become one of the challenges. Now, in the case of the Marriott Hotel project, which you cited, I joke that as a High Commissioner, you take the credit for all the work of your predecessors, and then you try and do as little work as you can on new projects, because it's not you that's going to benefit, it's your, it's 3 commissioners further into the future. So when I arrived, the Marriott project, I guess it was the long-term lease for the land in Douala got signed, and I went to the ceremony, and I'd done nothing. But now I'm having to start to do something because the next steps of moving that project forward become complicated. Whether it be effectively taking possession of the land, whether it be putting the financing together, and it's putting the financing together that ultimately will be the toughest and the most time-consuming thing. Now, where Canada has been very successful in Cameroonian infrastructure is around some of the CAN projects. So it was a Canadian company that worked on Bepanda in Douala, that completed the Alambi project in Yaoundé, and has undertaken some work on the Penetlant Est, so the access to the Japoma. Now, why were they successful? I mean, a number of reasons, and I credit the Canadian company for being very good at what they do, but the single principal reason is that completing these projects on time was a huge priority for the government of Cameroon. And so all that question of the internal coordination in the government of Cameroon, leaning on ministry this, on ministry that to make sure the financing got done, getting agreement and permits, and there was that intense pressure from the top, plus the external discipline of the CAF saying, if that stadium's not ready, you ain't having the competition, So you can see that it is possible for infrastructure projects to move ahead, but it's complicated and requires on the government side a high level of coordination and political will, essentially.
Thank you. I think we have time just for one question, if there's any.
We have another comment from someone who joined in. Ade Brian, who says Cameroon has a lot to do in terms of road network and making access bank system that can make loan available and facilitate financial transactions among business persons that can facilitate such free trade. I think Nigeria is on the top notch than Cameroon, especially in the banking sector. And this question also came in from an anonymous attendee who asked, what is the role of external bodies in the role of African trade, especially that of Cameroon? From time immemorial, we are still on a standstill.
Sorry, can we take the last question? What is the role?
What is the role of external bodies in the growth of African trade, especially that of Cameroon? From time immemorial, we are still on a standstill.
Does anyone want to try that?
I'll give a quick shot at that. So, it's important that under international agreements, for example, in the World Trade Organization, that preferential access be given to exports from developing countries, and I mean that's already the case. But as economies become more sophisticated and different kind of products and technologies emerge, it's important that framework be continually updated. And I guess a good example, a very recent example, would be, now this is not export, but it's related, is the development of vaccine production capacity in Africa, where there has been a proposal that the global international intellectual property regulations be relaxed in that particular sector to allow, to permit that vaccine manufacturing capacity to be established. And I think it's incumbent on the developed countries that are member of these international agreements to ensure that we continue to give essentially a kind of a preferential treatment, preferential access to developing countries. So that's really I guess that's the role of the international community.
Thank you very much. So before we round up, one last word for our audience. Your Excellencies.
Yes, this has been a very engaging discussion, and I'm actually glad to see that we've been able to sustain this discussion at least up today. Madam Freya Sanga has been working very hard with her group and her team to put this together, and we've had a number of engagements, and I'm glad to see that we've been able to sustain this, and I look forward to amplifying this, going forward. And yes, there is a lot of work to be done, but I think that this has already started, and having these conversations and these engagements would actually go a long way in getting in real time, what is actually happening out there, what are the encumbrances, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities that exist, and also getting these messages across to policymakers for, the actual policies to be made and implemented, and for returns to be, accrued and to be received on both sides and also at the continental level. And then for the youth, there is so much more that can be done in terms of integrating. Africa is a young continent. Africa is a young continent. We keep talking about the potential, and we're looking at the potential right now in front of us. So integrating the youth, and taking advantage, leveraging on what technology can do in terms of bringing people closer together and integrating peoples and cultures and economies. So we need to keep on with this. We need to sustain this tempo and build on it as well, and encourage the youth as much as we can, to grow Africa, to grow, partake, in growth and development of their individual countries and then as a continent as a whole. So I think that is the message across to the young Africans who are out there, who are doing a lot and who need all the support that they can get to do much more. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Excellency, any last word?
I guess first I would like to acknowledge the initiative of the Nkafu Policy Institute. I think it's very important that these kinds of discussions take place in Cameroon and in fact across Africa, so that people think about, reflect on, and can generate new ideas around this whole idea of opening up markets, regional integration, and how that can bring economic benefits to everybody, to all African, young and old, female and male, and I think that's really, really important. Very good questions from the audience, both real and virtual audience members, so I'd like to thank you for that. And I'd like to thank my colleague, the Deputy High Commissioner from the Nigerian High Commission, for her contribution. I think it's particularly smart for the Nkafu Policy Institute to focus this discussion on regional economic integration, on the potential for integration with the Nigerian economy. And of course, Nigeria as a regional engine potentially has a very significant role in helping all of its neighbors develop their economies through the trade mechanism. And finally, I'd like to just acknowledge that, and this always makes Canada very happy, that as a man, I'm in a minority in this panel. And that's very, very important, that we have, first of all, gender equality, and if you can put me in a minority, that's even better. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Cameroon's bilateral and multilateral trade, where do we go from here? Diversify our exports. Move from goods to services such as technology, music, tourism, invest in infrastructure, trade facilitation, trade financing, and most of all, create an enabling environment for SMEs to grow. Thank you. We've come to the end of this panel discussion.